In the last section, we did a deep dive on the navigator component and its three core methods: push, pop, and immediately reset route stack. In this section, we're going to start implementing our navigator inside of our main component. Remember, the goal here is to give the user the ability to navigate between the sign in and sign up screens. As soon as we get our navigator in our place, we're going to start tackling that. As mentioned before, the navigator component is a component just like any other. So we'll start off by importing the navigator off of the React object. We'll then replace the existing view and sign-in tag with the navigator. That means we also don't really need the view and text at the top, so we'll go ahead and take those off. Now the navigator is going to take 4 different properties. Let's write each of them out to start, and then we'll go through and talk about each of them. So the first one is going to be style. We'll have an initial route. We'll have render scene, and then configure scene. The first one, the style, I think we've got pretty much on lockdown. We know what's going on here. Just like any other container component, we're going to want this to have style of container, and we're going to want flex 1 on here so that it fills the entire area of the screen. Unlike other containers, however, we don't actually need justify content or align items on here, so we can go ahead and just take those off. Okay. The next property here is initial route. The initial route determines what the first component is when the navigator is first rendered. So in other words, when we first boot our app up, what is the first component that we want to show here? In our case, it's ultimately going to be the sign-in component. The next property is render scene. We're going to pass ultimately a function to this property right here. This function will be called with a route, and we'll talk about what a route is in a minute, whenever the view stack changes, whenever the navigator changes. Render scene will contain some functionality that tells the navigator how to render a given route at any given time. Finally, configure scene. This is a property that describes how newly rendered scenes, how newly rendered components should appear to the user. So in other words, whenever we say push a view onto our stack, this describes how that view will appear. Is it just going to poof, instantly show up? Is it going to float in from a side, or some special animation or what have you? In our app, we're going to have our views slide in and out from the left-hand side of the screen, as you see in many other applications out there these days. And so configuring that is actually really straightforward. We're just going to do it right now to get it done with. All we're going to do is pass a arrow function, return, and we're going to pass a object called navigator.sceneconfigs.float from right. So this, as you might imagine, is telling the navigator that whenever a new view is pushed onto the stack, it should float in from the right. And I know it said from right, you think that'd be the right-hand side. Well, it's not quite. It's going to appear to come in like so from this side. You'll see in a minute. Don't worry. So this function right here, this little area might look a little bit mysterious, but again, it's really just describing how new views appear to the user on the screen. So one quick note about routes, and we're going to start creating routes in the next section. Routes, when used with the navigator, are text strings that refer to a particular component. So our sign-in component, for example, might have a route name of sign in, and when we put together our sign-up component, it might have a route name of, say, just sign up. In other words, we might have a one-to-one mapping between our component names and the route names. So let's take a break here and continue in the next section and get started with defining some routes.